Well, this week, the advice for the administration of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine changed. It is now no longer recommended for those under the age of 60 in Australia. To discuss this and the rest of the week's news, I'm joined by Ebony Bennett from the Australia Institute and James Bolt from the Institute of Public Affairs. Hello to you both. Great to see you. Thank you for joining me. Let's get straight into it. It's worth noting that the risk of blood clotting here is very, very low. But James, we'll start with you. There've been some reports of people actually cancelling their AstraZeneca shots. Does there need to be a federal government-led public information and safety campaign here?
Yeah, I couldn't believe this one. We're so worried about vaccine hesitancy in the population. How about the vaccine hesitancy in our health bureaucrats? Take it from a Victorian, this is a race to get vaccinated, okay? We need to be informing people of the risks, but as you say, the chances of blood clots are low and lower than on the contraceptive pill. If people don't want to take AstraZeneca, that's fine, but, you know, let me take it, let other people take it. We should be rolling out vaccinations more and telling people how safe they are.
Ebony, do you think that really what needs to happen now is a public safety campaign? We heard Greg Hunt this week saying that perhaps it will mean that there's a higher uptake now among 50-something-year-old Australians who have previously been reluctant to get AstraZeneca but now can get the Pfizer. But is that beside the point?
Yeah, I think, you know, from go to woe, the whole vaccine rollout from the Commonwealth has just essentially been a bit of a one disaster after another. And we're at this point now where I think it has contributed to the hesitancy, not just the risks from the vaccine itself, but people are getting mixed messages from the government all the time. The health advice changes so constantly, it's kind of hard to keep a track. So I think you're absolutely right. Having a really clear and effective public health messaging campaign to get across the idea that this is urgent, that our continuing growth of the economy and dropping in unemployment really depends on being able to open up the economy to the rest of the world again, and that relies on vaccines. I think we're seeing a lack of urgency here, but it's very understandable that the public is risk averse. And you know, where is this massive public health campaign to acknowledge the risks but really explain to people the benefits of having a vaccine as soon as possible? We're really not seeing that, and of course the vaccine rollout just continues to be delayed and delayed and delayed.
Yeah, and you mentioned, a race, and the federal government has said at the moment this isn't a race. James, do you almost think that we are a victim of our own success? We've done so well compared to countries around the world when it comes to COVID cases. Has that played a part, do you think?
Yeah, the complacency has really set in because of the lack of COVID cases in the community. And now that we have our freedoms tied to these vaccination targets, I mean, let us hit them. Talking about this federal rollout, federal campaign, I can't get Nick Coatsworth off my TV. There's so many ads talking about the safety of the vaccines. I just don't know these faceless bureaucrats that are coming out saying don't get the AstraZeneca unless you absolutely have to, despite how safe it is.
Yeah, and tomorrow, of course, National Cabinet will hold an emergency meeting on the matter. We heard from the Victorian acting Premier today, as well as the New South Wales Premier. They want more vaccines, Ebony. Do you think from the beginning that the government put all its eggs into the AstraZeneca basket and that was the issue from the beginning?
Yeah, I think that's clear now. And what's not clear is, there's been some reports that the Commonwealth government was offered deals with Moderna and Pfizer much earlier in the piece and chose to go with AstraZeneca. And it's not clear how those decisions were made. National Cabinet isn't very transparent compared to what we used to have with COAG and other decision-making bodies, where we did used to get access to some of that advice from the public service, from health professionals and other things that go into that. So I think there is still a lot of questions to be answered, but frankly, we just need to get on with it. We need the vaccines to be rolling out. If AstraZeneca isn't going to work, what else is the government going to be putting into place? And how quickly are we going to see those supplies from Pfizer and Moderna come onto line and be available for people?
Yeah, I'm sure many of us do want life to return to normal at some point. Look, let's move on now. There's been talk about a potential leadership spill within the Federal National Party. James, our political editor, Andrew Clennell, has been reporting that potentially Barnaby Joyce tomorrow, as early as tomorrow, could try and still back the leadership from Michael McCormack. What do you make of it?
I can't really care who's in charge of the National Party from an individual standpoint. I just care about the policies that they have. And so let's talk about it. So this whole thing is based off the idea of a net zero target. There's a lot of nationals that are against it, and there seems to be some that are for it. Now, IPA research shows that a net zero by 2050 target puts 656,000 Australian jobs at risk. So whoever comes out of that Monday meeting to front the cameras, I hope they rule out any commitment to a net zero target.
Ebony, I'll throw this one open to you. Do you care about who might be in charge of the Nationals?
Yeah, look, it's important. Whoever's in charge is going to be the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia. But I do think James makes a good point here. The Nationals are the tail wagging the dog when it comes to climate policy. And the ructions that we've seen this week, whether it was the conniption from Keith Pitt or now this leadership challenge potentially from Barnaby Joyce destabilising things again while the Prime Minister's been overseas, really is because of climate policy and the complete inability of the Nationals Party to do what's in the interest of farmers and what everyone from family farmers to the finance sector to the G7 knows, which is that we have to decarbonise our economy as soon as possible. They're just ignoring the reality of where capital is going, of where the business community wants things to be headed. And at the moment, the Nationals are the ones holding the rest of the country hostage when it comes to climate policy. They are what's standing in between a sensible policy, a commitment to net zero by 2050 from the Commonwealth Government, when the reality is that every state and territory around Australia has already committed to that. So, you know, it's a really, I think it's important to examine the motives of what's happened this week as well as whatever the outcome is. And we're just, can't get anywhere on climate policy in Australia because of, particular people who can't deal with reality.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens, but not great timing, though, given that Scott Morrison is currently quarantining in the Lodge. Speaking of that, the Prime Minister has returned to Australia from his first major overseas trip since the beginning of the pandemic. James, how did you think that he fared on the world stage?
Considering how low my expectations were, pleasantly surprised. I mean, I did think he was going to come back with a net zero by 2050 target, so good news that he hasn't done that. We also have the free trade agreement with Britain, which I understand we're going to be talking about later, but that's good news. And it was really good to see a lot of G7 countries start to think about infrastructure spending for low and middle income countries to provide a realistic alternative to them signing up to the Belt and Road deal. So from all those perspectives, it's good. The one thing I am concerned about, and I wonder if this is going to be a lasting image, is the Scott Morrison at the pub photos. I personally would love to have a dinner in a British pub with my sister who lives in Scotland, but I have to wait until Scott Morrison tells me that it's safe to do so. For him to be at the pub and enjoying himself was didn't love those images, to be honest.
Yeah, and certainly that image outside the pub with a number of people certainly raised some eyebrows. Ebony, how do you think that the Prime Minister fared overseas, and do you think that photo or him being overseas in general sets the wrong tone under the circumstances?
Yeah, I think particularly for a lot of Victorians, it might rub the wrong way, those kinds of images. But on the whole, I think it's really important that the Prime Minister attends these kinds of things and engages with the international community. It's good to see him move away from that brain fart that was negative globalism. I'm not sure what happened to that, but I'm glad to see the back of it. Australia needs allies internationally. We're a middle power. We rely on the rules-based order that gets enforced by things like the G7 and these types of summits. So it's really good to see the Prime Minister engaging again. I think it is good to see that we've got a free trade agreement with the UK. The Prime Minister will be pleased to have made that announcement, a couple of other deals along the way, but he didn't manage to get a one-on-one meeting with the US President Joe Biden. I think The other thing that's really coming down the barrel for Australia is our lack of ambition on climate change. We saw all the G7 countries commit to ending overseas finance for unabated coal-fired power this year. That's pretty soon, certainly in terms of timelines for the coalition. And the EU is certainly looking at introducing carbon border adjustment mechanisms down the line, which will impact Australian exports because we currently have no price on carbon. We're polluting the atmosphere for free while other nations are trying to do the right thing. So, it's good that the Prime Minister is engaging again, but a couple of really big challenges, I think, coming down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's certainly been another big week. We have to leave it there, though. Ebony Bennett and James Bolt, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.